Hello from Moral Side of the News, and happy Father's Day to all of our fathers out there. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children, and with me this week, another distinguished panel. Reverend Sally McClain, Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, Rabbi Stan Miles, Louisville Melton School, Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition, and Father Tony Smith, Archdiocese of Louisville. Up first, this weekend marks the second annual observance of Juneteenth as a federal holiday. It marks the abolition of slavery. Many celebrate by attending festivals, parades, and by calling attention to modern inequality. So panelists, turning to you, some say Juneteenth can remind us to support Black-owned businesses. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a good start. I mean, the holiday is really a convoluted, accumulated version of a lot of things that has culminated in what is now called Juneteenth. Juneteenth coming from the date that the news arrived in Texas in June of 1865, when the news of the end of slavery arrived on June 19th. So it's the last 10th day of the month. That's where Juneteenth came from, and I attribute that to the creativity of the slaves that received the news. So that's where the term Juneteenth originated from. Of course, it became a national holiday last year, and all that entails. I mean, days off, recognized as a federal holiday, like any other federal holiday. So that is noble. It is a good start, and that's all it is, a start. For those of us who have been celebrating it for years, of course, the January 1st was the actual day of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, even though that Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to the Union states. It only applied to the states that were in rebellion against the United States. So every January 1st, many Black churches especially, we hover around the church and celebrate the Emancipation Proclamation signing on that date. So, but it always culminated into what is now known as Juneteenth, which is a noble thing, and it hopefully a start to continue the unfinished work that was connected with that whole emancipation and the war. Hopefully, this holiday will lead to the eventual signing of the federal bill HR 40, and that's a bill that was designed primarily just to study the implications of slavery, not to pass any reparations bill, but just to study the implications and the worthiness of the consideration. So hopefully that will be the next federal step, is to consider and pass that bill that's been around for a good time, and that is HR 40. So I'm glad it's been recognized. Sad that many of the holidays are more symbolic than substantive. So I'm glad that there is recognition. As the Bible says, and stand with a Testament and Old Testament scholar, Deuteronomy 15:15 says, remember the days when you were slaves. And also says, another place in Deuteronomy, remember the days when you were slaves in Egypt. It's a time that should be remembered and should never be forgotten. So I'm glad to see that it is being recognized on a national and local level.
Isn't it somewhat sad that the event, the emancipation itself, which was tragically limited, but it took place on the 1st of January 1863, but then Juneteenth happened more than 2 months after the end of the Civil War. And the fact that the news didn't reach Galveston, Texas, how tragic is that? The telegraph was invented in the 1840s and was fully operational, I believe, around the country by 1865, if not around the world. I'm not sure whether the cables were transoceanic then, but definitely around the country. And the fact that the slaves who were living in Texas didn't know about it over 2 months after. So how many how many lives were lost and disrupted between the end of the war and Juneteenth? That to me is the tragedy and part of the problem.
Well, actually, Stan, it was effective January 1st, 1863 in the South.
Right.
So it just wasn't enforced until actually the end of the Civil War. But it was actually enforced or in effect on January 1st, 1863. So it took not only 2 months, but 2 years before it became a reality in Texas. And the southern states were really the only states where the Emancipation Proclamation had any power and authority in effect.
Well, I had not heard of Juneteenth until last year. I think last year was the first time I'd ever heard it even being discussed. And I think that's pretty interesting because it's taken this long for that story to reach the public to make it something that it is or that it's going to become. So I think it's a really good thing. And I hope that everyone learns something as we make this celebration.
A couple of comments myself. I'm always glad to celebrate major events, major celebrations. If you look out there every day of the year, there's something that this country supposedly is celebrating, which is usually something innocuous. But here we have a quality celebration, if you would, national celebration, which we should celebrate. I'm always happy to especially ask the people of this country to celebrate the freedoms that we supposedly have by constitutional right, but also responsibilities. And not to take away from the blacks of our country, but there are many other organizations and peoples that we have suppressed tremendously over the past 200 years or so of our existence. So we need to be aware of that. I'm reminded of, the philosopher whatever, but his comment was, if we do not remember our history, basically paraphrasing, we are bound to repeat it again. And so slavery is very much still in the world, still in our country in a certain sense. And we're not really willing to celebrate the possibility of seeing all individuals as declared to be free. Then we can have some problems there. Also, if I may, it's a happenstance of dates. We said Father's Day as well for this celebration. But also in our tradition, we celebrate something called Corpus Christi, which is, we say the Latin for the body of Christ, in which we are basically saying it's not just about sacramental work, whatever, but we're saying we are all children of the one God, no matter what our race, creed, politics might be. And to me, having these three coalesce into this one celebration, I think, is perhaps divinely inspired, that we bring all this together and say, let's celebrate not just this year, last year, but forever. As Clay, you said, it's a beginning. It's not the end for sure. So.
Yeah, I want to make one comment about being in Australia during their sort of their 4th of July celebration. And they started that celebration with the the original indigenous people, the Aborigines. Yes, there we go. And so, and there were people there in different costumes and different uniforms. It was a multicultural celebration. And I would love to see something like that in America, where we started with our Native Americans and celebrated and then went on.
Well, you mentioned Australia. I think Australia is quite different and should be admired for how they've handled the inequity in that country. I've had the good fortune of traveling there. My daughter lived there in Australia. And Australia has done a much better job in being honest about its history in a way that the United States has not, particularly with how they've recognized the indebtedness to the Aboriginal people there in Australia. So if we can just mirror what they've done there with that, that'd be a good place to start. Also with what they've done with guns over there in Australia. So they can look to Australia for a lot of things. And because I've been there and had some connection with my daughter there, I would think Australia would be a great model to look to emulate equity with an acknowledgement of their history, as well as what they've done with gun violence as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Sally.
As far as establishing holidays, we're pretty good. As far as changing behaviors and hearts and minds, we need to improve.
Right, we do.
All right, continuing on with our program, Moral Side of the News. Modern inequality is also front and center with the Courier-Journal's decision to bring its newsroom to neighborhoods. This week, the CJ said some neighborhoods get lots of coverage, especially those booming with development, while other areas get little attention at all. So the newspaper plans to set up shop, so to speak, at public libraries in underserved areas in hopes of doing a better job of covering the entire community. So turning to our panel on Moral Side of the News, what do you think of this?
I think it's a step in the right direction, but I think the Courier-Journal specifically needs to step backward. What do I mean? A number of years ago, at least one day a week, there was a neighborhood section of the Louisville Courier-Journal that every week spoke of the events going on in given neighborhoods all around the reading area of the CJ. I haven't seen that section for years and years. It was a good thing. Did a good job. Being boots on the ground in the neighborhoods, even better. Why not have both?
I think it's a step in the right direction. Stan, I agree there. But the whole newspaper industry has been morphed into something completely unrecognizable to what it used to be 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, for that matter. They're struggling for survival. Courier-Journal doesn't exist, doesn't operate in Louisville anymore. It's actually published out of town. They have a skeleton crew that actually handles the operation, but it's actually printed out of state. And they don't no longer own the building. The building itself is up for sale. So downtown, which was a cornerstone, milestone in downtown Louisville. So the newspaper industry has radically changed. I commend them for being novel in this sense, trying to reach out to neighborhoods. They're really trying to struggle to maintain relevance. Many people just don't have a clue about the Courier-Journal. So by coming in neighborhood, it works well for them to give them a profile within those neighborhoods to hopefully get people to subscribe and become patrons of the newspaper. So I think it's a commendable idea. I love the fact that they are doing this. I think it's a good thing. I encourage it. I hope it works well. I work with another newspaper, the Louisville Defender, weekly newspaper. It's one of the longest running Black newspapers in the nation, been operating almost 89 years, about 90 years almost, continuous operation. So I've been working with that newspaper for many years because they cover stories that the Courier-Journal does not. But I think that it's a good gesture that the Courier-Journal, which once I was a paperboy at one time, and I used to use it as a selling tool when I used to sell papers. That the Courier-Journal, Louisville Times, one of the top 5 papers in the country. That was my little selling tool. So it has quite a reputation of being one of the best in the nation, and they're trying to struggle to maintain relevance now. I think it's a good thing.
I agree with what both of you said so far in the sense of going back to the Bingham years, because it was very much award-winning, et cetera. And to be honest, I think it's a good idea, but the pessimist in me says it's a little bit too late. As you said, Clay, the paper industry, news, it's dying. It's going to electronic now. Even if with the Courier-Journal you have any kind of difficulties, they want to tout you to the electronic version already. So I think it's a little too late. But I like the idea of trying, as Stan was saying, the neighborhood section. I mean, that would be fantastic, but it's going to be too expensive.
They don't have any writers anymore. There's no writers there.
Exactly right. Yeah. So
I mean, my neighbor used to be a writer. He was an award-winning white writer. Philip Bailey, he was there. He's with the USA Today now, the national branch, but he no longer writes for the Courier-Journal. He can't write for the Courier-Journal, even though he's in the neighborhood. But because they've scaled down the team, even the talent they have locally can't even write for the Courier-Journal anymore. So,
well, I think it's a scary thing the way everyone is getting their news these days. I mean, they select what news they want to hear or what news they want to see, and it's very selective. A lot of it comes from Facebook or other social media. Of course, a lot of it comes from social media. And I'm one that's always gotten the morning paper. I still do. And I believe that there are articles that are applicable to our everyday living that we need to know about. And my kids sort of make fun of me, like, Mom, you can get this, online. But I think we're very selective in what we want to hear and what we want to know. And if we've got a newspaper in front of us, then we see in print what's going on.
The big problem also is I read the CGA every morning, and I read this morning, and it was as if the latest news in the Courier-Journal was news that happened 48 hours ago on Tuesday. It's as if Wednesday didn't exist yet. And thinking back of, oh gosh, I'm old, so I can be nostalgic. The good old days when you didn't have a newspaper, you had numerous editions of the same newspaper, early, mid, late, the times when we had the Louisville Times as an afternoon paper. The newspaper isn't newsworthy anymore in its present state.
Well, one advantage, and I'm arguing, I'm a big proponent of news, and I mentioned the Louisville Defender newspaper. The trend now, with there being so much news, cable news, et cetera, the one void is local news. Local news is the and reported area of the news industry. What you see on the internet, what you see on Facebook, what you see on various news feeds nationally does not cover local news. So there's a tremendous void, and really the growth area is with no local news, because it's the area that is the most underreported. So I think it's that they've been watching the trends. Apparently, have a new editor there at the Courier-Journal. She knows where the trends are going, where the voids are. So in an attempt to cover local news, you have local sports. You still have high school sports. That's very important here. Of course, most of us have gray hair or hair at whatever form is in. We look through the obits. That's local. And that's news we can use. Sad to say, but many of my mother, she's 94, that's the first place she goes to is the obituary column. She's the last surviving member of her high school class. So naturally, she's been watching it incrementally over the years. And I'm the same, so you can only get obits in local news, local high school sports, local news. So it still has a relevance, and I think has a opportunity to reconnect with the neighborhood. So I'm encouraged by this gesture. Hopefully it can bring some value to the the Courier, but also to the neighborhood as well.
Well, worth noting
too.
Go ahead, Tony. No, go ahead.
I was going to say there's one quick element. Of course, I live over the east section of town now. I'm in residence over here by Valhalla Golf Course, but we get about 3 journals that we don't even pay for. I guess our membership in the community, but all 3 journals are loaded with what's happening in our community. So in a sense it's coming out, but it's now being, as you say, farmed out to specific journals. But we see it every week. We get about 3 or 4 journals. We leave it in the kitchen for coffee breaks and go through it. But news is news, and I applaud it if we can get it in there. Even the black paper and whatever here. And we wish the heck we had the Courier-Journal back in the old days. But life moves on, gang. Even no matter if we have gray hair or not, it moves on.
Well, worth noting, the aforementioned Bingham family at one time owned the Courier-Journal, WHAS TV, and WHAS Radio, and a few FM stations, including WAMZ, until the family sold out of the business in 1986. So that's a little history lesson of the Courier-Journal and Bingham family. We'll move on to our third topic today. In the past week, January 6th, congressional hearings have gone prime time, speaking of media, carried by multiple networks. Now, former President Trump has issued a 12-page statement assailing the panel as illegitimate and one-sided. So turning to our panel, on moral side of the news, the battle continues. So the question is, do you expect any definitive outcome from these January 6th hearings?
Well, I mean, it is reporting details that otherwise may not have been reported. I mean, those that were convinced about the legitimacy of the whole argument were already convinced. I don't think they're going to sway any new viewers to one opinion or the other. They may have some effect on some so-called independents, but in general, it's not going to convince those that are entrenched in their ideology about what happened on January 6th, and those that oppose it. So I don't think it's going to sway it one way or the other. It's making for some good theater of sorts. It does have some viewing value to the networks that were covering it live, and I think that it's important to get at the bottom for the historical purposes, for the record, so that the 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40 years down the road, they will look at this incident quite different than the way we do now. So I think in that regard, they are doing a great service, verifying and documenting the actual history of events that occurred and the implication of the president in those events. So I think it has definite value. I haven't been watching it, but I'm glad to hear that it had started, but it did end abruptly because of some so-called technical issues. But I think it has served the community well by being aired the way it has.
No, I was going to say, I've been watching it, and I think one of the scariest things that have come out of this is the change of the narrative. To change the narrative so that it wouldn't be Pence that was trying to get the National Guard and extra security for the Capitol when that happened, instead of Trump. And to me, this whole thing has been that change in the narrative. It's just not knowing about Juneteenth or the Tulsa massacre. You know, those things we didn't hear about. Now they're coming out. I think that it is important that this be recorded and as much as possible be heard.
I applaud the courage of the members of the previous administration who have voluntarily come forward and given us a part of the story that we were lacking. It had to be challenging and tough, and not a little frightening for them to make that decision and to go that distance.
I would concur what I'm hearing here, that it mitigates against the big lie, as they call it. I haven't read the whole thing from President Trump, but it sounds like it's the old thing all the way from Lenin to Hitler and Goebbels. You know, if you tell a big lie, a really big lie, as often as you tell it, it eventually is seen by some as being true. And for him to keep saying this is all a big lie, when even his own family members are saying to him, I can't repeat on the word, what the Attorney General used, but I mean, it's why is he doing this? Well, it's a psychology of a psychopath in a sense. I hate to say that, but it's if you keep repeating, maybe there'll be enough people to accept your definition that will basically bring about some semblance of what you would like. But I applaud them. I haven't watched all of it, but it is, like you say, Stan, it's interesting those who are coming forward now and making comments and statements that I do not think they would be making such statements. So.
All right, panel, we have about 3 minutes left. I want to just close out with this. We offer everybody a big thank you to the people of Kentuckiana for another successful WHAS Crusade for Children. Panelists, I know you join me in applauding those who helped raise more than $5 million for special needs children. Let's hear your thoughts on the crusade for the 2022 edition.
Well, high five. We're always glad to get that high five. That's always a concern. Of course, our request is twice that, but to at least hit a 5. That was our goal, to at least hit that. So I commend all those who worked and gathered the pennies and whatever they contributed to at least hitting that number. We at least did a bit more than last year, so that's always encouraging. So a big thank you, I agree, was in order for the crusade this year.
Our Clergy Advisory Council had what I believe is the best meeting of the year, and we don't have this meeting every year. Thank God we have it most years, but not every year, and that's the meeting about a week after the crusade that we get together and say, well, we have all of these extra dollars that we haven't allocated. How do we split this pot? And we do, and it's fun, and it's full. what it is, it's fulfilling. And so we say thank you. Thank you to everyone who has given to the Crusade for Children. Thank you for those firefighters who, regardless of weather, and weather this year was a true challenge, stand and collect. And also thank you to the most wonderful, selfless Crusade staff, people like John Blim and Dawn Lee and Janine Hickerson, who really move the Crusade and make it work. So thank you.
When I tell other people out of state how much we raise for the Crusade, they're absolutely astounded. They just can't believe it. But I want to present a challenge for next year because it will be the 70th year. And I would hope that we would aim for $7 million and try and make that possible.
And you made me realize something. I know we have to go. That money was raised from Kentuckiana, one of the poorest states in the Union.
Mm-hmm.
They got to underscore that. We raised a lot, but from one of the poorest states in the Union. Now that just further, I guess, highlights the depth of the gratitude and the near miracle of being able to raise that kind of money from this venue in Kentucky.
My comment is ditto to everything's been said.
That's the way we'll end this edition of Moral Side of the News. A quick story. The Crusade's the one and only. You won't find it anywhere else. Tried other places, duplicated? No. It's right here, born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. Raising $205 million since 1954, and 100% of all that money has gone back to the community in the form of grants to help children with special needs. So thank you, panel, for your kind words, and thank you to everyone who contributed and made a big difference a couple of weeks ago. Thanks to our panels.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John.
A pleasure.
John, thank you.
Thank you, Sally McClain. Thank you, Stan Miles. Thank you, Clay Calloway. Thank you, Tony Smith. You can watch this program and other Moral Side of the News is from the past on YouTube. Just go there and search for Moral Side of the News. Until next week, thanks, panel, and we'll see you next time.
For the 69th WHAS Crusade for Children, the grand total is $5,133,684.69.
Thanks for making the 69th annual WHAS Crusade for Children a huge success, raising more than $5.1 million for children with special needs. It's not too late. You can still mail your contribution to WHAS Crusade for Children, 520 West Chestnut Street, Louisville, Kentucky, 40202. That's 520 West Chestnut Street, Louisville, Kentucky, 40202. Go online and donate at WHAScrusade.org and see the many new ways you can help change a child's life. Thanks for watching Moral Side of the News. We'll be back again next week with an all-new conversation.